She was just an old woman pumping gas when a group of bikers decided she was an easy target. They laughed, walked away, and never thought twice about her. What they didn't know? The old woman made one phone call to her son, and that son had a way of making sure every wrong got accounted for. Margaret Ellis had driven this stretch of I-71 so many times she could probably do it with her eyes closed. Columbus to Cincinnati. 2 hours, 15 minutes if she didn't stop. She always stopped. The BP station off exit 108 was her spot. Same one for 11 years. Clean restrooms, decent coffee, and the cashier named Rosa, who always remembered she took 2 sugars. She pulled her 2009 Buick LeSabre into the lot just past noon, parking carefully between the painted lines the way she always did. The sun was bright, the air still carried that cool October edge, and she was in a good mood. Her granddaughter Lily had been practicing her dance routine for 3 months. Margaret wasn't going to miss it for anything. She was humming something she couldn't name when they arrived. 7 motorcycles pulled in loud enough to turn every head in the lot. Not the friendly kind of loud, the kind that said, "We're here, deal with it." They spread across the lot like they owned it, 2 of them parking so wide they ate up spaces meant for cars. A blue pickup had to circle twice before giving up and parking near the road. Margaret didn't pay them much attention. She'd seen motorcycle groups before. Most were perfectly decent people. She unscrewed her gas cap and focused on the pump. "Would you look at that?" one of them said, loud enough to carry. She glanced up. A heavy-set man with a gray beard and a worn leather vest was pointing at her Buick with a grin on his face. "What year is that?" 1985. A few of the others laughed. Margaret pressed the button for regular unleaded and said nothing. Lady took about 6 turns to park it, another one added. Thought she was docking a cruise ship. More laughter. Margaret stared at the numbers rolling on the pump and breathed slowly through her nose. She was 71 years old. She had raised 2 kids, buried a husband, and sat with her mother through the final weeks of her life. A few loud men with nothing better to do were not going to ruin her afternoon. The pump clicked off. She replaced the nozzle, screwed her gas cap back on, and went inside for her coffee. Rosa was busy with a line of customers, so Margaret helped herself at the coffee station. 2 sugars, a little cream. She took her time. When she came back out, she noticed the group had crowded near the entrance to the convenience store, blocking the walkway just enough to make people squeeze past. A young mother with a stroller had to go around through the parking lot entirely. Nobody from the group moved or offered to step aside. Margaret walked to her car. That's when she saw it. A shopping cart was resting flush against the rear passenger door of her Buick. Not gently, flush, as in someone had sent it rolling with intention. The dent wasn't huge, but it was there. A curved crease just below the door handle, paint slightly scraped. She stood there for a moment looking at it. One of the bikers, younger, maybe late 20s, with a red bandana tied around his wrist, was watching her with a half smile like he was waiting to see what she'd do. "That was already there," he said casually, before she'd spoken a single word. Margaret looked at the dent. Then she looked at him. Then she opened her purse, took out her phone, and started taking pictures. The dent. The shopping cart. The position of it. The group standing nearby. She moved slowly and deliberately, getting every angle. "Lady, what are you doing?" the same one asked, the smile fading slightly. She didn't answer. She took 2 more photos, then got into her car, set her coffee in the cup holder, and locked the door. She scrolled to her son's name in her contacts. Daniel picked up on the second ring. "Mom? Didn't expect to hear from you. You on the road?" "I'm at the BP off 108, she said. "Stopped for gas." "Everything okay?" She looked at the dent through her driver's side mirror. "Someone put a card into my car. Left a dent." "A group of bikers," she paused. "I took pictures." A short silence. Daniel knew his mother well. She didn't call during road trips unless something was actually wrong. She wasn't the type to complain about small things, and she certainly wasn't the type to call her son to vent. "Send me the photos," he said. His voice was calm, but she could hear something shift in it. "All of them. Already sending. Stay in your car until they leave. Then you drive to Lily's recital, and you have a wonderful time." "That was the plan," she said. "Good. I'll handle the rest." She set the phone down, sipped her coffee, and watched the bikers eventually lose interest and move away from the entrance. Within 10 minutes, they were gone. Margaret started the engine, checked her mirrors, and pulled out of the lot. She had no idea that one photo, just one, was about to unravel something far bigger than a dented door. The recital was everything Margaret had hoped it would be. Lily hit every step, remembered every turn, and when she took her bow at the end, she found her grandmother's face in the crowd immediately. Margaret waved with both hands like she was flagging down a ship. Lily giggled. The woman sitting next to Margaret smiled. It was the kind of small, warm moment that doesn't make it into anyone's highlight reel, but stays with you for years anyway. After the show, they went to Lily's favorite pizza place, a noisy little spot near the theater with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox that still worked. Margaret ate 2 slices and listened to Lily explain, in very serious detail, why the second act of the routine was harder than it looked. Margaret nodded along and meant every bit of it. It was a good evening. She let it be a good evening. But in the back of her mind, she kept thinking about that half-smile. The one on the young biker's face before she'd said a single word. The kind of smile that assumed she wouldn't do anything. That she'd look at the dent, shake her head, and drive away quietly. People had been underestimating Margaret Ellis her entire life. She had long since stopped being bothered by it. For hours north, Daniel Ellis was not having a quiet evening. He was at the Valor Foundation fundraiser in downtown Indianapolis, a veterans charity event he helped organize every year. Suits, speeches, a silent auction. He was supposed to be focused. He was shaking hands and nodding at the right moments, but his eyes kept going back to his phone. His mother's photos had come through while he was mid-conversation with a donor. He'd excused himself, stepped into the hallway, and opened them one by one. The dent was minor. He registered it and moved on. His mother drove a 12-year-old car with a few existing scratches. The dent was annoying, but not the point. What stopped him was the 4th photo. Margaret had a habit of photographing everything in a scene, not just the subject. She'd probably learned it from years of being the family photographer at birthdays and holidays, always getting the wide shot first. So the 4th photo was a wide one. It showed the parking lot, the group, 3 of the bikes, and the men standing near them. On the back of one vest, dead center in the frame, was a patch. A black skull with a red lightning bolt through the left eye socket. Below it, 3 letters Daniel didn't recognize as a formal club name. He'd never seen that exact patch before, but that wasn't what made him stop. What made him stop was that he had seen it described before. 3 weeks earlier, at a rest stop discussion among veterans passing through Indiana, someone had mentioned a group causing repeated problems at highway locations, gas stations, rest stops, truck stops, across Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Minor stuff each time. Property scuffs, blocked access, intimidation without ever crossing a clear legal line. The kind of behavior that was difficult to act on individually because each incident, on its own, seemed too small to pursue. Nobody had filed a formal complaint. Nobody had coordinated. They'd each just moved on. Daniel put his phone in his pocket, went back into the fundraiser, and spent the next 40 minutes finishing his obligations, thanking donors, wrapping up the auction coordination, saying his goodbyes. He was professional about it, but his mind was already somewhere else. On the drive back to his hotel, he called the BP station off exit 108. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. BP, this is Ethan. Hi Ethan, my name is Daniel Ellis. My mother was a customer at your station this afternoon. She drives a beige Buick, stopped around noon. A shopping cart was pushed into her vehicle by a group of bikers who were in your lot. I'm calling to ask whether your security cameras would have captured that. A pause. We do have cameras, yeah? I'd have to check the footage. I'd really appreciate it if you could hold on to anything from today. I'm not asking you to do anything with it yet. Just don't let it overwrite. Most gas station systems looped every 48 to 72 hours. Daniel knew this. He needed to move before the footage was gone. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You said a group of bikers? That's right. 7 motorcycles. They were there midday. Another pause, longer this time. We've had some issues with customers today. A few people mentioned things. What kind of things? Minor stuff. A couple of complaints about a cart hitting someone's vehicle. One lady said her side mirror got clipped while she was inside the store. She thought maybe it was just a parking lot accident. Daniel kept his voice even. Would you be willing to sit down with me tomorrow and review that footage together? I can be in Columbus by mid-morning. Ethan didn't hesitate as long as Daniel expected. Yeah, come in. Ask for me at the counter. Daniel thanked him and ended the call. He sat in the hotel parking lot for a few minutes, engine running, thinking. His mother's incident wasn't the only one. He'd suspected it from the moment he saw the photos, but now he had a station manager confirming it without even being prompted. Multiple complaints. Same day, same group. And if this matched what he'd heard from the veterans at the rest stop, the same group had been doing this for weeks. The interesting thing was, none of it was dramatic. No fights, no threats, no single moment bad enough to make someone call the police on the spot. Just a consistent drip of small damages and minor harassment that people brushed off because the effort of dealing with it felt bigger than the incident itself. That was the pattern. And it worked, until someone actually started connecting the dots. He pulled up the photo again. The patch. The skull with the red lightning bolt. He zoomed in, saved a clean crop of it, and sent it to two people he trusted. A former colleague who'd spent years in logistics and knew every truck stop between Columbus and Nashville, and an old friend from his veteran network who had broad contacts across the Midwest. The message he sent was short. Seen this patch before? Looking for any location complaints tied to this group. He set the phone on the passenger seat and finally drove toward the hotel. One thought stayed with him as he parked and walked to his room. His mother had taken that photo without knowing what was in it. She was just being thorough, the way she always was. Making coffee with 2 sugars, taking her time, documenting carefully. She had no idea she'd just handed him the thread that might unravel the whole thing. He smiled at that on the way up the stairs. Then he went inside, sat at the small desk by the window, and started making a list. Daniel arrived in Columbus at 9:47 in the morning. He hadn't slept particularly well. Not because he was angry. Anger wasn't really his style, but because his mind had stayed busy through the night, turning the pieces over, looking at them from different angles. By the time his alarm went off at 6, he'd already been awake for 40 minutes. He stopped at a drive-thru for coffee, merged onto I-71, and made the 2-hour drive without the radio on. He did his best thinking in silence. The BP station looked different in the morning. Quieter. A few cars at the pumps, a delivery truck backed up near the side entrance. The lot was clean, the signs bright in the pale October sun. Nothing about it suggested that anything unusual had happened here the day before. Daniel parked, went inside, and asked for Ethan at the counter. The woman at the register picked up a phone, said 2 words into it, and pointed toward a door marked staff only. Less than a minute later, a man came through it, mid-40s, sturdy build, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead like he'd forgotten they were there. He had the look of someone who ran a busy operation and didn't waste words. "Ethan Brooks," he said, extending a hand. "Daniel Ellis. Thank you for making time." Ethan nodded once and gestured for him to follow. The back office was small and practical. A desk, a monitor, a filing cabinet with a coffee mug on top of it. A whiteboard on the wall had a weekly cleaning schedule written in blue marker. Ethan pulled a second chair around to his side of the desk and loaded up the camera system while Daniel sat down. "I pulled the footage from yesterday after you called," Ethan said, navigating through the files. "Noon to 3. That's the window you're looking at." "That's right. I want to show you something before we get to your mother's car." That got Daniel's attention. Ethan clicked through to a timestamp just before 11:30. The angle was from a camera mounted above the entrance, angled down and slightly left. It covered most of the main lot. 7 motorcycles rolled in. Daniel recognized them immediately from his mother's photos. For the first few minutes, nothing notable happened. The riders fueled up, a couple went inside, a couple stayed near the bikes. Normal enough. But Ethan fast-forwarded slightly, and then slowed it back down. Watch the blue Honda on the left side. A blue Honda Civic was parked 2 spots away from the pumps. One of the bikers walked past it slowly, not hurrying. As he passed, his elbow dropped, casual, almost lazy, and caught the Honda's side mirror. It snapped forward. The man didn't look down, didn't look around. Just kept walking. He didn't even slow down, Daniel said. "Nope." Ethan clicked forward again. "Now watch the silver Jeep near the air pump." Same thing. Different person this time. A deliberate shoulder check against the Jeep's open door as the owner was climbing out. The owner stumbled slightly, looked up, and the biker was already several feet away. By the time the owner processed what happened, the moment had passed. The owner shook his head and went inside. Daniel watched without speaking. Ethan showed him 4 more clips. A cart sent rolling toward a parked minivan. A wing mirror angled down on a pickup truck. Not broken, just repositioned enough to be a problem for the driver. A woman's grocery bag knocked off the trunk of her car as she was loading. One of the bikers brushed past too close, and the bag fell, sending items rolling across the lot. The biker laughed. His friend laughed. Neither stopped. Every incident was minor. Each one took only a few seconds. And not a single person had reacted in a way that escalated it. They'd all absorbed the moment and moved on, which was exactly what the group seemed to count on. How many complaints did you get yesterday? Daniel asked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. 3. And I think those were just the people confident enough to say something. Most people don't want the hassle. He paused. I've been managing this station for 6 years. You develop a sense for groups that are just loud versus groups that are doing something on purpose. Yesterday felt deliberate. It was, Daniel said. The question is whether it's a pattern or whether yesterday was unusual. Ethan looked at him for a moment. What do you mean? Has this group been here before? Ethan thought about it. I'd have to check, but maybe 2 months ago? I remember a group of bikes that made a few customers uncomfortable. Didn't have anything concrete to report, so I didn't log it officially. But I remember thinking about it afterward. Daniel asked if he could get a legal copy of the footage, the full window, all cameras. Ethan said he'd need to make a call to the station's corporate office to authorize a copy, but he didn't anticipate a problem. He'd flag it as a property damage documentation request, which was straightforward. While Ethan made the call, Daniel stepped back into the lot and stood near the pump where his mother had been the day before. He looked at the space, the angle of the cameras, the position of the store entrance. He was building the picture in his head, not just of yesterday, but of how something like this operated over time. The call came back to his 2 contacts that morning while Ethan was still on the phone. One hadn't seen the patch before. The other one had. His friend from the veteran network, a man named Carl who'd spent 15 years doing supply chain work across the Midwest, texted back a single line. Heard of complaints about a group matching that patch at a rest stop near Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and a truck stop outside Dayton. Nothing formal, just word of mouth. Daniel read it twice. Elizabethtown, Dayton, Columbus. And according to the veterans at the rest stop 3 weeks ago, there had been mentions of Indiana too. This wasn't a group that had one bad afternoon. This was a group operating across a corridor, Interstate 65 and I-71, running from Louisville up through Columbus, branching toward Indianapolis. Highway routes, high-traffic locations, places where people were passing through and unlikely to follow up. When Ethan came back out, Daniel asked one more question. The customers who complained yesterday, do you have any contact information for them? Names, receipts, anything? Ethan considered it carefully. He was protective of customer data, which Daniel respected. I can reach out to them myself, Ethan offered. Let them know someone is looking into it, and ask if they'd be willing to be contacted. That works perfectly, Daniel said. They shook hands at the door. Ethan said he'd have the footage copied and ready by end of day. Daniel thanked him and walked back to his car. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. What had started as a dented door on his mother's Buick had just become something else entirely. He had footage. He had a geographic trail. He had a manager willing to cooperate and customers who might be willing to talk. The bikers had spent weeks assuming no one was paying attention. That assumption was about to cost them. Tom Reynolds had known Daniel Ellis for 19 years. They'd met during their 2nd year of service, been assigned to the same unit, and somewhere between long drives and longer silences they'd become the kind of friends who didn't need to explain things to each other. Tom now ran a small logistics consulting firm out of Indianapolis, which meant he spent a significant portion of his life on highways and knew every truck stop, diner, and rest area between Ohio and Tennessee better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. When Daniel called him at 7:30 that morning and explained what he was building, Tom didn't ask many questions. What time do you want to leave? Was all he said. They met at a gas station just off I-70 west of Columbus at 9. Tom was already there when Daniel pulled in, leaning against his truck with a paper cup of coffee and a road atlas open on the hood, an actual paper atlas, which Daniel found both amusing and completely on brand. Nobody uses those anymore, Daniel said, getting out. Nobody gets lost like I don't anymore either, Tom replied, not looking up. They spent 10 minutes mapping out the day. 2 stops based on what Carl had texted and what Ethan had mentioned, a truck stop near Dayton and a diner outside Indianapolis. If either location gave them something useful, They'd adjust from there. Tom drove. Daniel handled the notes. The truck stop outside Dayton was called Crossroads 40. It sat at the junction of two state routes, the kind of place that was always half full regardless of the time of day. Truckers rotating in and out, a steady flow of highway travelers, a small attached garage that did tire repairs. It smelled like diesel and fried food and had the particular hum of a place that never fully slept. They went inside and asked for the manager. A woman named Brenda came out from the back, late 50s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who processed information quickly and didn't have much patience for anything that wasted her time. Daniel introduced himself and explained briefly why he was there. He showed her the cropped photo of the patch. Brenda looked at it for about 2 seconds. "Oh, I know exactly who that is." She said it without hesitation, which told Daniel this wasn't a vague memory she was fishing for. This was something that had stuck. She took them to a corner booth away from the counter and sat down across from them. 3 weeks ago, she said, a Saturday afternoon. The same group, she counted 9 bikes that time, maybe 10, had pulled in during the lunch rush. They'd taken up the large trucker booth near the window without waiting to be seated, which in itself wasn't a crime, but they'd also been loud in a way that made other customers uncomfortable. One of the waitresses had asked them politely to keep it down because there were families nearby. They didn't get aggressive, Brenda said carefully, like she wanted to be accurate. But one of them made a comment that made the waitress feel like she shouldn't have said anything. She came back to the counter, and I could see she was shaken. "Did you log it?" Daniel asked. "I filed an internal incident report. We do that for anything that affects staff." She paused. "When they left, we found one of the booth seats had a long scratch across it, like something sharp had been dragged across the vinyl. Deliberate or not, I couldn't say for certain, but my gut said deliberate." Tom leaned forward. "Did you catch anything on camera?" Brenda nodded slowly. "We have interior cameras. I kept the footage because I thought I might need it for the insurance claim on the booth. Never ended up filing because the repair cost didn't meet our deductible." She looked at Daniel. "You want a copy?" "If you're willing to provide one, yes." She was willing. While Brenda went to pull the footage, Daniel and Tom sat quietly for a moment. A waitress came by and refilled their coffee without being asked. Outside the window, trucks moved slowly through the lot like large, unhurried animals. "They're doing just enough," Tom said quietly. "Every time. Just enough to irritate, not enough to get the police called." "Which means someone in that group understands exactly where the line is," Daniel said. That was the part that bothered him most. This wasn't random bad behavior. There was a functional awareness running through it, an understanding of how much damage you could cause before it became a formal problem. It suggested this had been going on long enough that they'd refined it. They knew the formula. Brenda came back with a USB drive. She'd made a copy of the relevant window and labeled it with the date and time. Daniel thanked her genuinely. She waved it off. "If this helps, good," she said simply. "My waitress shouldn't have gone home feeling the way she did." The diner outside Indianapolis was a different kind of place entirely. Smaller, family-owned, the type with a handwritten specials board and photographs of the owner's grandchildren near the register. It was called Pauline's, which was also the name of the woman who met them at the door. Pauline was 70, moved carefully, and had run the diner with her late husband for 31 years before taking it over alone 8 years ago. She was not a woman easily rattled, but she remembered the group clearly. 2 weeks ago, a Thursday, she said, pouring them coffee before they even asked. They came in around 2 in the afternoon. Quiet time for us. Ordered coffee. A few of them ordered food. She sat down across from them. When they left, the back corner table had syrup poured across the seat. Not spilled, poured. Like someone had upended the bottle deliberately. The kind of thing that looks accidental until you think about it. She'd also found a crack in the window near that table. A small one, running from the corner. She hadn't connected it to the group initially. She did now. Pauline also had something neither Brenda nor Ethan had provided. She'd written down a partial license plate. She'd been suspicious enough in the moment to jot down what she could see from the window before the bikes left. Daniel looked at the number on the notepad she slid across to him. It was partial, 4 characters out of a full plate, but it was something. By the time they got back on the road toward Indianapolis, Daniel had 3 locations confirmed beyond Columbus. 3 separate businesses, 3 separate sets of damage, 3 separate witnesses willing to cooperate, plus partial footage from 2 of them and a partial plate from the third. The trail was real. It was documented, and it stretched across more than 100 miles of interstate. Tom drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking. They picked the wrong kind of people to mess with, he said. Managers who keep records. Owners who write things down. People who don't forget. Daniel looked out the window at the highway. They also picked the wrong gas station, he said. Tom glanced at him. My mother was there. Tom smiled and turned his eyes back to the road. Yeah, he said. That was their real mistake. The Veterans Charity motorcycle ride had been Daniel's idea 3 years ago. It had started small, 40 riders, a simple route through Louisville, a collection box at the finish line for the Valor Foundation. Last year it drew 312 participants from 6 states. This year the registrations had crossed 400 before they even finalized the route. It had become something real, something people planned around, and Daniel was proud of it in the quiet way he was proud of most things, without making a production of it. The ride was scheduled for Saturday. Daniel had spent Wednesday and Thursday following the trail with Tom. Friday he drove to Louisville to handle the final logistics, permits, volunteer coordination, the route checkpoint setup. He had a folder of evidence sitting in his passenger seat and a mind that hadn't fully switched off since Columbus, but he was disciplined enough to put it aside when something else needed his attention. The ride came first. The rest would keep. Saturday morning arrived clear and cold, the kind of October day that was perfect for riding. Sharp air, bright sky, the trees along the route running full orange and red. By 8 in the morning, the staging area at Waterfront Park was already filling up. Bikes of every kind lined up in orderly rows. Volunteers in yellow vests moved through the crowd with clipboards. The smell of exhaust and coffee mixed in the air. Daniel was near the registration tables when Tom appeared at his shoulder. We've got a situation at the South Entrance, Tom said quietly. Daniel didn't change his expression. What kind? 7 bikes. Maybe 8. Just pulled up. Daniel already had a feeling before Tom said the next part. The patch, Tom said. At least 3 of them are wearing it. Daniel handed his clipboard to the volunteer next to him and walked with Tom toward the South Entrance without rushing. He'd learned a long time ago that the way you approach something set the tone for everything that followed. Walking fast signaled alarm. Walking steady signaled control. They came through the group. 7 bikes, 8 riders. Some standing, some still seated on their bikes. They hadn't entered the staging area yet. They were at the edge of it, which was technically still public space. A few of them were looking around at the event with an expression that Daniel recognized. It was the same energy he'd seen in his mother's photos. Not aggressive exactly, more like they were deciding what kind of afternoon to have. A volunteer, a young man named Greg who'd helped with the ride for 2 years, had already approached them and was explaining the registration process with admirable patience. The group wasn't listening particularly well. Daniel stopped a few feet away. Morning, he said pleasantly. You here for the ride? The man nearest to him, tall, early 40s, the gray-bearded one from Margaret's photo, looked him over once. Heard about it. Figured we'd check it out. Glad you did. Registration's right over there. $20 entry. All of it goes to Veterans Support Services. We'd love to have you join. The man's eyes moved across the staging area slowly, taking in the size of the event. We don't really do the registration thing. It's pretty straightforward, Daniel said. Name, bike details, sign the waiver. Takes about 4 minutes. We'll just ride along. Daniel kept his tone easy. Can't do that, unfortunately. Insurance requires every rider to be registered. It protects you as much as it protects the event, he paused. It's the same rule for everyone here. 400 riders all went through the same process this morning. There was a moment, just a few seconds, where the dynamic tightened. The gray-bearded man looked at Daniel the way people sometimes did when they were deciding whether the person in front of them was worth testing. Daniel looked back at him with the particular calm of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to end and wasn't anxious about it. We're good, the man said finally, and turned back to his group. They stayed at the edge of the event for another 20 minutes. Daniel didn't watch them constantly. That would have looked like something it wasn't. But he kept them in his peripheral awareness while he moved through the crowd, checking in with volunteers, greeting registered riders. During that 20 minutes, 2 things happened. First, one of the group's members wandered into the staging area and walked slowly between the parked bikes. He didn't touch anything, but 3 separate registered riders came to Daniel within 10 minutes of each other to mention they'd seen someone moving through the rows who didn't have a registration wristband. Each of the three described the same person. None of them had said anything directly because they weren't sure if it was a problem. It was a small thing, but Daniel noted it. The second thing was more significant. A man named Harold Briggs, a 68-year-old retired truck driver from Lexington who rode a spotless burgundy Harley and had been at every single charity ride since the first one, came to find Daniel near the checkpoint table. "Daniel," he said, dropping his voice. "You see that group near the south entrance? I'm aware of them." Harold nodded slowly. "I've seen them before. We're a group just like them, same patch. Rest stop on I-65, maybe 6 weeks ago. I was heading back from Nashville. They were there when I pulled in." He paused. "When I came out, my saddlebag latch was broken. Just snapped clean off. Could have been anything." But he shrugged with the expression of someone who decided not to make a fuss at the time and wasn't entirely at peace with that decision. "Did you report it?" Daniel asked. "To who?" "It was a rest stop. There's nobody to report it to." "Did you file anything with your insurance?" Harold shook his head. Cost of the latch was $40. Didn't seem worth the paperwork. Daniel took out his phone and asked Harold if he'd be willing to write down what he remembered: the date, the location, the details of the damage. Harold said he'd do it right now if Daniel had something to write on. By the time the charity ride departed at 10:15, Daniel had spoken to 4 more people with similar stories. Not all of them were certain the same group was responsible, but 3 of them had noticed the patch. One woman, a nurse from Cincinnati named Diane who rode every year with her husband, had actually photographed the group at a gas station in Bowling Green 2 months earlier because something about them had felt off to her. She still had the photos on her phone. She showed them to Daniel at the finish line. He looked at the photos carefully. Same patch. Same gray-bearded man in the front. Different location, different day, but unmistakably the same group. He thanked Diane and asked if she'd be willing to share the photos formally if it came to that. "Absolutely," she said without hesitating. "I took them for a reason." By the end of the afternoon, the charity ride had raised more money than any previous year. It had also handed Daniel something he hadn't expected to find there: a growing network of ordinary people who'd each absorbed a small injustice quietly, alone, assuming no one else would care. They were wrong about that. Sarah Whitmore had a reputation for being methodical. Not slow, methodical. There was a difference, and anyone who'd worked with her understood it quickly. She didn't move until she had what she needed, but when she moved, she was precise. Daniel had known her for 4 years through mutual contacts in the veterans community. She'd done pro bono legal work for several veteran-owned small businesses and had a background in civil litigation that made her exactly the right person for what Daniel was now holding. He called her on Sunday evening, the day after the charity ride, and laid out everything clearly and in order. He spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for a moment. "How many locations?" she asked. 5 confirmed. Possibly more. "How many witnesses willing to cooperate?" 11 so far. With more likely once word spreads through the people I've already spoken to. Another pause. "And the footage?" 3 separate sources. All obtained legally, all time-stamped. He could hear her thinking through the line. "This isn't a small claim situation anymore," she said finally. "If what you're describing holds up, and from what you've told me it sounds like it does, we're looking at a coordinated pattern of property damage across multiple jurisdictions. That changes things significantly." "I know," Daniel said. "That's why I called you." They agreed to meet in person on Tuesday. Sarah's office was in a converted townhouse in the Fountain Square neighborhood of Indianapolis. Clean, quiet, organized in the way that suggested she thought about where everything went. She had a long work table in her meeting room that she used for exactly this kind of case, laying everything out physically so she could see it all at once. Daniel came with a folder that had grown considerably since Columbus. Printed photos, time-stamped footage logs, a handwritten timeline he'd built night by night, contact details for every witness, and the partial license plate from Pauline's Diner. Sarah went through it piece by piece. She didn't rush. She made small notes in the margin of her own legal pad, occasionally asking a clarifying question, occasionally asking him to repeat a detail so she could write it precisely. When she finished going through the folder, she set her pen down and looked at the table. "The partial plate is useful but limited on its own," she said. "The footage is your strongest material right now. The witness statements add credibility to the pattern, but individually, none of the incidents crossed the threshold that would typically compel law enforcement to prioritize it. Which is exactly what they've been counting on, Daniel said. Yes, Sarah nodded. But here's what changes when you aggregate it. Individually, a scratched mirror and a broken booth seat are nuisances. Together, across 5 states, with footage and multiple credible witnesses, you have grounds for a coordinated civil action. And potentially, depending on how the pattern is characterized, something that gets the attention of prosecutors looking at broader harassment or intimidation statutes. She picked up the photo of the patch. This is important. If this group has any formal organizational identity, even informal, it creates the possibility of joint liability. That means individuals within the group can be held responsible not just for what they personally did, but for what the group did collectively, if their membership and presence can be established. Daniel hadn't pushed his thinking that far yet. He absorbed it. What do we need to build that, he asked. More documentation, more witnesses, and ideally, identification of individual members, not just the group as a whole. That identification came from an unexpected direction. 3 days after the meeting with Sarah, Tom called Daniel from the road. Check your email, he said. I just forwarded you something. Daniel pulled it up. Tom had been casually monitoring public social media. Not anything private, just open accounts and public posts. He'd been searching the patch description and variations of it for days without result. Then he found them. A public account, run apparently by one of the group's members, had been posting travel updates for weeks. Locations, photos, check-ins at various highway stops. The account had a modest following and the posts were casual, the kind of thing someone puts up assuming only friends will see it. Nothing incriminating in any single post. But taken together with the timeline Daniel had already built, several of the location check-ins match dates and places already identified through witness statements. The Dayton truck stop, a rest stop on I-65, a gas station in Bowling Green, the same one where Diane the nurse had taken her photos. Each post was public. Each one was time-stamped. And each one quietly confirmed what witnesses had already described. Daniel forwarded everything to Sarah the same afternoon. Her response came within the hour. This is significant. Don't contact them. Don't engage with the account. Just document everything exactly as it appears. He did. Over the following days, the picture became more complete. 2 of the witnesses Daniel had connected with at the charity ride reached out independently to say they'd spoken with other people who had similar experiences. A retired schoolteacher from Louisville named Helen had watched the group at a rest stop in August and taken note of 2 partial bike registrations visible in a photo her husband had taken. A couple from Dayton had filed a minor insurance claim after their car was scratched at a highway rest stop and still had the claim paperwork, including the date and location. Each piece, on its own, proved nothing dramatic. Together, they were becoming difficult to argue with. Sarah called Daniel on Thursday evening. I've been contacted by an attorney in Nashville, she said. A business owner down there reached out to him after hearing through the regional small business network that someone was compiling evidence about a group causing highway corridor problems. The owner has his own documentation. Daniel sat forward. Nashville. Yes. Which extends your geographic corridor further south than you'd mapped it, she paused. Daniel, this group has been operating across at least 4 states over a period of roughly 3 months. The accumulation of evidence we now have is substantial. I think it's time to start thinking about next steps more formally. What does that look like? It looks like bringing the affected business owners together. Not just coordinating individually, actually getting them in the same room. Because right now, everyone has a piece of this. Nobody has seen the whole picture except us. She paused again. When they see the whole picture, I think the response is going to be very different from what this group is expecting. Daniel thought about his mother at the gas station, taking her photos carefully before getting into her car. Calm, deliberate, not reacting, just documenting. She hadn't known what she was starting. Set it up, he said. The Regional Transportation Conference had been scheduled for months before any of this started. It was a modest annual event. Business owners, highway corridor operators, rest stop managers, small diner and truck stop proprietors from across a 4-state region gathering in Nashville to discuss shared concerns. Road traffic patterns, seasonal business fluctuations, infrastructure issues. Practical things. The kind of conference that rarely made news but kept a certain kind of economy functioning quietly in the background. Sarah had made a few calls. 3 of the business owners Daniel had contacted were already registered attendees. 2 more agreed to attend specifically because of what Daniel had told them. The Nashville attorney, a measured, soft-spoken man named Gerald Payne, was presenting a short segment on property damage documentation practices for small businesses, which meant the subject matter was already on the agenda. It wasn't a setup. It was just good timing, pointed in the right direction. Daniel drove to Nashville on Wednesday evening. Tom came along, mostly because Tom was constitutionally incapable of sitting still when something was developing, and partly because his logistics background meant he understood highway corridor economics in a way that added genuine value to the conversation. They checked into a modest hotel 2 blocks from the conference center and went over everything one more time at the small table by the window: the timeline, the witness list, the footage log, the social media documentation. It was organized well. Sarah had helped structure it clearly enough that anyone could follow it without needing background. Daniel slept better that night than he had in 2 weeks. The conference opened Thursday morning with a welcome address and a panel on fuel pricing trends that drew a decent crowd. Daniel sat near the back and listened without participating. He wanted to get a feel for the room first, who knew each other, how people talked, what the general mood was. The mood was familiar. These were practical people who worked hard and dealt with problems by solving them. They weren't complainers. They were operators. Gerald Payne's segment came after the lunch break. He started with something straightforward, a general overview of how small businesses could better document property damage incidents to support insurance claims. Photographs, timestamps, witness contact information, the importance of preserving surveillance footage before it overwrote. Basic stuff, but presented cleanly and without condescension. About 10 minutes in, he shifted. "I want to share a case study," Gerald said. "Not from a single business, but from several. What happens when isolated incidents at different locations are actually connected, and what that changes legally and practically for the businesses involved." The room settled. People who had been half-checking their phones put them face down. Gerald didn't name anyone. He described the pattern: highway corridor, multiple states, minor property damage repeated across locations over several months, a group identifiable by a consistent visual marker. He kept it factual and moved through it methodically. Daniel watched the room. About 3 minutes into Gerald's description, a woman near the front, heavy-set, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, put her pen down and looked up from her notepad. She turned slightly in her chair and made eye contact with a man 2 rows behind her. Something passed between them that Daniel recognized immediately. It was the look of 2 people who had just heard someone describe their own experience. Gerald paused at the right moment. "If anyone in this room has encountered incidents that match what I've just described, I'd welcome a conversation after this session." He moved on to his next point smoothly. No drama, no pressure. After the session ended, 7 people approached Gerald within 15 minutes. Daniel and Tom stood to one side and let it happen without inserting themselves. This was Gerald's room. Sarah had been clear about that. Let the business owners find each other organically. Don't steer it too hard. The moment people felt managed, they became cautious. They didn't need to be steered. They were already talking. The woman with the silver hair, her name was Carol, and she ran a travel plaza outside Murfreesboro, Tennessee, had a specific incident from 6 weeks ago. A group matching the description had passed through on a weekday afternoon. Minor disturbance in the lot, nothing that warranted a police call. When she reviewed her cameras the following day, she found a crack in the passenger side mirror of a company vehicle that had been parked near the fuel island. She'd filed it with their fleet insurance and thought nothing more of it. Until now. A man named Robert, who managed a chain of 3 rest stop convenience stores across southern Kentucky, had 2 separate incidents. Different dates, different locations, but matching the description. He'd actually flagged it internally to his district manager at the time, wondering if it was the same group twice. His district manager had told him it was probably coincidence. It wasn't coincidence. A truck stop owner from just outside the Tennessee border had a damaged awning support. One of the metal braces had been bent, apparently when a bike had reversed into it, and the rider simply left. The owner had it on camera but hadn't known who to send it to, or whether it was worth the effort. One by one, the pieces came out. Daniel had seen this moment coming since Columbus, but seeing it actually happen was different from anticipating it. Each person had been carrying their piece of it alone. A small frustration, a minor insurance claim, a staff member who went home unsettled. None of them had thought their individual experience was significant enough to pursue seriously. But in that conference room in Nashville, with 7 people standing in a loose circle comparing dates and locations and descriptions, the individual pieces suddenly became something else. Tom leaned close to Daniel and said quietly, "They're doing the math." He was right. You could see it happening in real time. People cross-referencing mentally, asking each other dates, nodding slowly as the timeline connected. The same group, the same patch, across their businesses, across their states, across months of what each of them had absorbed as just the cost of running a highway location. Gerald circulated through the group calmly, collecting contact details, making introductions, gently noting which incidents overlapped geographically. He was good at it, never pushing, never leading, just holding the space open for the connections to form. An hour after the session ended, the group had moved to a quieter corner of the conference center with coffee and a clear table. Daniel joined them, introduced himself, and laid out what he had, briefly, clearly, without exaggeration. The footage from Columbus and Dayton, the witness statements from the charity ride, the social media trail that confirmed locations and dates. When he finished, Carol looked at him over her reading glasses. "So this has been going on for at least 3 months," she said. It wasn't a question. "At least," Daniel said. "Possibly longer." Carol looked around the group. "I think we stop handling this separately," she said simply. The others nodded, not dramatically, not with anger, just with the quiet resolution of people who had finally seen the full picture and made a decision about what to do with it. The bikers had spent 3 months operating on the assumption that no one would ever connect the dots. They hadn't counted on a conference in Nashville. They hadn't counted on Gerald Payne's segment. And they certainly hadn't counted on 7 business owners standing in a circle, finally seeing what this actually was. The 5 weeks that followed the Nashville conference were not dramatic. That was the thing nobody would have predicted, least of all the bikers themselves. There were no confrontations, no heated exchanges in parking lots, no moments that would have made good television. Just a slow, steady process that moved forward one documented step at a time, the way things do when the foundation beneath them is solid. Sarah Whitmore coordinated with Gerald Payne from the day after the conference. They divided the work cleanly, Sarah handling the Ohio and Indiana cases, Gerald managing Kentucky and Tennessee. They communicated daily, sometimes twice daily, sharing documentation and making sure the overall picture remained consistent across both sets of cases. The first formal step was simple. Every affected business and individual submitted organized property damage complaints, not rushed, not emotional, but carefully prepared with timestamps, photographic evidence, and witness statements attached. Each complaint referenced the others, making clear from the outset that this was not a collection of isolated incidents, but a documented pattern across multiple locations and dates. Insurance companies, it turned out, responded very differently to organized documentation than they did to individual claims filed months apart with no supporting context. The partial license plate from Pauline's Diner turned out to be more useful than Daniel had initially estimated. Sarah had passed it to an investigator, a former insurance fraud specialist named Ray who now worked independently and had the kind of contacts that made certain searches faster than they would have been through conventional channels. Ray wasn't flashy. He worked from a small office and communicated almost entirely by email. But within 4 days of receiving the partial plate, cross-referenced against the social media location data and the charity ride witness descriptions, he had narrowed the registered ownership to 3 possibilities. Within a week, through vehicle registration records and publicly available information, he had a name attached to the primary bike, the one ridden by the gray-bearded man who had been present at the most locations and appeared in the most footage. His name was Russell Greer, 51 years old. Dayton, Ohio. 2 prior civil judgments against him, both minor property disputes, both settled quietly years earlier. Nothing criminal, nothing that would have flagged him anywhere. But both prior judgments were now relevant context. Sarah added them to the file without comment. They spoke for themselves. The social media documentation created an unexpected complication for the group, or rather, It created an expected complication that they hadn't thought to avoid. The public posts Tom had found weren't just useful for confirming locations. Several of them contained photos that placed specific individuals at specific locations on specific dates. When cross-referenced with the business surveillance footage from those same dates, the overlap was difficult to argue against. One post in particular became significant. It showed 3 members of the group outside the BP station off exit 108, Margaret's gas station, taken from inside the lot and posted publicly the same afternoon of the incident. The person who posted it had captioned it with something intended to be humorous. It wasn't humorous to anyone reviewing it in a legal context. When Sarah showed it to Daniel, he looked at it for a long moment. "They documented themselves," he said. "People often do," Sarah replied simply. The letters went out in the 4th week. Formal legal correspondence to Russell Greer and 4 other identified members of the group, those whose presence could be confirmed across multiple locations through footage and witness statements. The letters outlined the documented incidents, the evidence supporting each claim, and the intention to pursue civil action for property damage and related costs unless the matter was resolved through a structured settlement process. Daniel didn't see the letters go out. That was Sarah and Gerald's domain. His role had shifted weeks earlier from investigator to witness, and he was comfortable with that transition. He'd done what he could do. The rest required people with law degrees. What he heard back, through Sarah, was that the response from the group was not what anyone might have expected based on their behavior at gas stations and rest stops. There was no posturing, no counter-threats, no dramatic response at all. Russell Greer's attorney, a man who apparently handled routine civil matters in the Dayton area, contacted Sarah within 8 days of the letters going out. His tone, according to Sarah, was businesslike and without bluster. He asked for the full documentation package. Sarah sent it. There was a silence of about 6 days. Then Greer's attorney called back and asked whether a settlement discussion was possible. He'd seen the footage, Sarah told Daniel afterward. All of it. The Columbus footage, the Dayton footage, the Nashville attorney's materials. When you put it all together in sequence, the pattern is it's not ambiguous. There's nothing to argue with. The only question is how much and how it gets structured. 2 of the other identified members retained their own attorneys. Both attorneys, after reviewing the documentation, reached out within 2 weeks of each other. Both asked about settlement terms. The 3rd and 4th members did not retain attorneys immediately. They were named in the formal civil complaints that Sarah and Gerald filed in their respective jurisdictions. Once the complaints were filed and properly served, both retained representation within 10 days. The settlements came in stages, which Sarah had anticipated. Greer settled first. The amount covered the documented property damages across all Ohio locations, plus legal costs, plus a contribution to a highway business community fund that Gerald had suggested as part of the resolution structure. It wasn't a punishing number. It was a fair one, calibrated precisely to what the documentation supported. Sarah had been careful about that. The goal was accountability, not spectacle. The others followed over the subsequent 2 weeks. Some negotiated slightly on the terms. None disputed the core facts, because the core facts were not disputable. One member, the youngest, the one with the red bandana who had smiled at Margaret in the gas station lot, wrote a brief personal statement as part of his settlement terms. It was short and not particularly eloquent, but it acknowledged what had happened and that it was wrong. Margaret read it when Daniel showed it to her. She read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it on the kitchen table. "Good," she said. That was all. Ethan Brooks at the BP station received a settlement contribution that covered the insurance deductibles for 3 affected customers who had never filed formal complaints. He called Daniel when the check arrived. "I didn't expect this," Ethan said. "You held the footage," Daniel said. "You made all of it possible." Brenda at the Crossroads 40 truck stop used her portion to give her waitress, the one who'd gone home shaken, a bonus that covered 2 weeks of pay. She didn't announce it or make a story of it. She just did it. Pauline, at her diner outside Indianapolis, had the cracked window repaired and the booth reupholstered. She sent Daniel a photograph of the finished booth with a note that said simply, "Good as new. Thank you." Harold Briggs got his saddlebag latch replaced. He sent Daniel a photo of that too, with a slightly longer note that ended, $40. But it was never really about the $40. No, it never was. 2 months had a way of changing things without announcing it. The trees along I-71 had dropped most of their leaves by the time Margaret Ellis made the drive again. November had settled in quietly. Gray skies, bare branches, the particular stillness that comes after autumn finishes its business and winter hasn't quite decided to show up yet. The highway was steady but not heavy. Margaret drove at her usual pace, comfortable in the left lane, coffee in the cup holder, a radio program about birds she half listened to and half ignored. She wasn't nervous. She hadn't been nervous about this stretch of road since the day it happened, which was something she found mildly interesting when she thought about it. Some people, after an unpleasant experience somewhere, developed an association with that place that lingered. Margaret had never been built that way. A place was a place. What happened in it was separate from what the place was. The BP station off exit 108 appeared on her right at just past 10 in the morning. She signaled, took the ramp, and pulled in. The lot looked exactly as it always had. Clean, well-lit despite the overcast sky, the same pumps in the same positions. A few cars fueling, a family loading bags into a minivan near the entrance. Rosa was visible through the glass at the register, talking to a customer. Margaret parked, carefully, in 2 movements, between the painted lines, and sat for just a moment before getting out. She looked at the rear passenger door of her Buick. The repair had been done by a good body shop in Cincinnati, recommended by Daniel, and done well. The paint matched perfectly. If you didn't know the dent had been there, you'd never look for it. She'd looked for it once, after she picked the car up, running her fingers along the panel to feel for any unevenness. There was none. She got out, stretched, and went inside. Rosa looked up from the register and smiled immediately. "Margaret, haven't seen you in a while." "Been a while," Margaret agreed. "2 sugars." "I know," Rosa said. Margaret helped herself at the coffee station, the same way she always had, and stood at the counter for a few minutes talking to Rosa about small things. Rosa's daughter, who'd just started college, the price of everything going up, whether the winter was going to be bad this year. The easy conversation of people who know each other in the small, but genuine way that comes from years of brief, consistent contact. She was on her second sip when Ethan Brooks came through the staff door. He looked different from the first time Daniel had described him to her. More relaxed, maybe. Or maybe she was just seeing him without the context of surveillance footage and legal processes surrounding the image. He was simply a man who ran a gas station and had done the right thing when it mattered. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, and shook her hand with both of his. "It's really good to finally meet you in person." "Likewise," she said. "And please, Margaret." He smiled. "Daniel said you'd say that." Daniel arrived 11 minutes later. He pulled in beside her Buick, got out, and came through the door with his coat collar up against the November air. He looked the same as always, steady, unhurried, the kind of person who moved through spaces without taking up more room than he needed. Margaret watched him come in and felt the particular quiet pride that she never said out loud and didn't need to. He hugged her first, then shook Ethan's hand. They took the corner table near the window, the one with the clearest view of the lot, and Ethan brought coffee for himself and Daniel without being asked. Rosa dropped off a small plate of the packaged cookies that Margaret had once, years ago, mentioned she liked. Rosa didn't say anything about it. She just set them down and went back to the register. For a while they talked about practical things. Ethan mentioned that the station had updated its camera system, better resolution, longer storage window. Not directly because of what happened, he said, but it had pushed the decision forward sooner than planned. He'd also put up 2 new signs near the lot entrance about property damage liability. Small things, but they meant the conversation with every customer now started from a slightly different place. Daniel updated Margaret on the final settlements. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, asking 1 or 2 precise questions. She wanted to understand it completely, not just the outcome but the structure of it, how it had been built, what each piece had contributed. She was that kind of person, always had been. When Daniel finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lot. "All of that," she said, "from 1 phone call." "From 1 phone call," Daniel confirmed. She shook her head slowly, not in disbelief, but in the particular way people do when something strikes them as both improbable and entirely logical at the same time. "I almost didn't call," she said. Daniel looked at her. This was new. She hadn't mentioned this before. "I sat in the car for a minute," she said. I thought, he's busy. It's a small thing. The dent isn't that bad. I don't want to make a fuss. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. And then I thought, no, that's exactly what they're counting on. That I won't make a fuss. She looked at Daniel directly. So I called. Ethan was quiet on the other side of the table. He'd heard pieces of the story, from Daniel, from the process, from the documentation that had moved through his station like water finding its level. But hearing it from Margaret herself was different. There was no drama in how she told it. No performance. Just a woman describing a decision she'd made in a parking lot on an October afternoon that turned out to matter more than she'd known. The thing is, Margaret continued, setting her cup down, it wasn't really about the car. It was never about the car. No, Daniel said. It was about the next person. The one who comes after me and gets the same half smile and thinks, well, I suppose I'll just let it go, she paused. If I let it go, I'm making that easier for them. And I didn't want to make it easier for them. Ethan nodded slowly. He thought about the customers who had come to him that day with small complaints, uncertain whether they were making a fuss over nothing. He thought about the ones who hadn't said anything at all. You didn't make it easier for them, he said. No, she agreed. I made a phone call instead. They stayed for almost an hour. When Margaret finally stood to leave, Ethan walked her to her car. He looked at the rear passenger door without saying anything about it. The same door, repaired, indistinguishable now from the rest of the panel. Safe drive, he said. Always, she replied. She got in, adjusted her mirrors, and pulled out of the lot at her usual pace. Daniel stood near his car and watched her go. She gave one small wave without looking back, the way she always did, and merged back onto the highway ramp. He stood there for another moment after she was gone. The lot was quiet around him. A couple of cars at the pumps. The hum of the station doing what it always did. Ordinary, functional, unchanged on the surface. But something had shifted here. Permanently, and without fanfare, something had shifted. It had started with one woman who refused to assume her silence was the reasonable choice. Who took her photos, got in her car, and made a call. Who understood, without needing anyone to explain it, that the small things are only small until someone decides they aren't. Daniel buttoned his coat against the cold, got into his car, and pulled out of the lot. Somewhere on I-71, his mother was already listening to her bird program, coffee in hand, driving to Cincinnati at her usual pace. Getting it exactly right. And,